Hi guys, it's Troy at the Full Setup here, back with another video for you today, and today we've got a RGB liquid cooler review. We're reviewing the Deepcool Gammaxx L240 liquid cooler. Now, I did do an unboxing of this on my channel about a month ago, so if you want to see the unboxing a little bit up and close a little bit more, make sure you go and watch that video. Apologise, it's took me a little bit of a while to get the review to yourselves and also to Deepcool. I've had a horrible cold for the last few weeks, so as you can still hear, I'm a little bit croaky. And yeah, it's just been hard to get the voiceover done. I've had the footage ready for a while. But this is a 240 RGB cooler from Deepcool. It's available for about £80. It supports Asus Aurora Sync, ASRock Polychrome, MSI Mystic Light, and Gigabyte RGB Fusion. So I'm going to take you in for a closer look in a minute. I'm going to show you all around it. Going to have some benchmarks. Then I'm going to come back with my pros and cons of this cooler, because there is something I'm not super happy with it. And then at the end, I'm just going to show you a load of Aura Sync as well, just running some B-roll at the end of the video. So let's go in and take a closer look. The Deepcool L240 all-in-one liquid cooler is positioned directly in between their Maelstrom RGB and Captain RGB coolers, but it manages to achieve something that both of these coolers cannot lay claim to, as the L240 has synchronized RGB fans and CPU water block. My personal opinion is that the white Captain is definitely better looking for my type of builds, but the L240 is really one of the best looking RGB liquid coolers for under £100. They all feature the same aluminium radiator with E-shaped fin stacks to enhance heat circulation, and all have rather short braided tubing at 30cm. This is fine for mid-tower PCs, but for full tower builders, you will need to top mount your radiator. The L240 also features a faster pump than the Deepcool Captain at 2,550 RPM, up from 2,100. This is the same pump used on my favourite cooler from Deepcool, the Castle RGB. So that must have you thinking, it's got a faster pump than the Captain, it has more RGB than the Captain, and it's slightly cheaper than the Captain. Surely there must be some trade-offs. Well, there are. Firstly, the included RF120 RGB fans that run between 500 and 1800 RPM look a little different from the ones you receive in their multi-packs. They have no anti-vibration pads and the wires are not sleeved. At a closer look, you can also notice that the RGB connections are opposite, and that's because the L240 has no included controller and only can be run via your motherboard's 12V RGB headers. I find this odd, as even their single fans come with this controller, and the L240 comes with mounting brackets for platforms that were available before the RGB headers were widely used. I wouldn't let it put you off completely though, as I was able to plug the extension cable that came with the triple pack of fans into the L240's extension cable, and at the end of this video I will have the system running on Aura Sync with 6 RGB devices plugged into one header. Although that controller is missing, Deepcool are their normal cells with lots of extras. A standard 4-fan PWM splitter is included, but there are only bolts for 2 fans. There's also a small sachet of thermal paste and lots of mounting gear for all modern platforms except Threadripper. To install on AM4, you screw directly into your motherboard's backplate, but for all other platforms you will need to use the backplate included in the box. Intel faces towards the board for Intel and AMD faces towards for AMD. Insert the 4 long bolts to the backplate and then lock them into place. Fix the correct bracket to the pump, the smaller are for AMD and the larger are for Intel. Now apply a small amount of thermal paste and screw your pump into position. You only need to finger tighten these bolts, and I always start by tightening opposite corners. Moving on to the benchmarks then. Firstly, I would like to thank Arctic Cooling for providing all the thermal paste for my cooler reviews. Arctic MX4 offers fantastic thermal performance at a wallet friendly price and is available in a wide range of tube sizes. So here are the PC specs, and I have the fans now set up in the push configuration, and we are running them with the Asus Turbo fan profile. I find this fan profile keeps my system silent at normal use, with a nice bump when things get toasty. The L240 doesn't even break a sweat with the Ryzen 2600 at stock settings. The fans for the most were running at 800 RPM with temps always in the low to mid 40s. Overclocking the Ryzen 2600 to 4.2 GHz takes a serious bump in voltage. We have to move from 1.2 to a massive 1.425 volts with load line calibration set to level 2. Running IDA 64 for half an hour and temps are reaching up to the high 70s. This is certainly starting to heat up, but IDA 64 really is a worst case scenario test. Moving back to Battlefield 5, and temps are much better, and for the most we were running in the low 50s, As for the fans, they were mostly running between 1100 and 1300 RPM, meaning the noisiest part of my rig was definitely my RX 590. So there was an up and close with some benchmark scores, and the cooler does perform very well indeed. I'm very happy with the performance wise of the Deepcool L240. But that brings us on to some pros and cons, and I've been really positive about everything that Deepcool sent over, and it's not just because they're sending me stuff, I've just been really positive about it. And I am positive about this cooler, but the cons for me are a little bit more than what I would normally say are the cons when I come up with Deepcool. And what they are is basically, it feels like they're trying to cut the price down of this cooler a bit because they don't want it, because it's got that faster pump than the Captain, and it's also got all the RGB. I feel like they don't want it to outdo the Captain in that sense. They want the Captain to be sat higher up in the product stack, and I feel like they've tried to make some cutbacks on here, and I don't think they're necessary cutbacks. So the fans I can be a little bit forgiving with, like not having the isolation pads, like the sound dampening pads on, and not being braided. You sort of forget about that, okay? You do forget about that. But for people that want it all matching, I don't understand. They do this with the Gamerstorm as well. So the Gamerstorm fans will have Gamerstorm written on them. So all their fans, even though they're the same fan, they look a little bit different. And for anyone that wants to build a full matching system, you get that little bit of OCD. Now, once all the lights are on, you don't even notice, but I just don't understand it. You look at every other fan company, they just make all the same fans. Of course, they put different fans with different coolers, but they're just the same across the board, aren't they? If you go and buy separate ones, they look the same as the ones you get with your RGB cooler and etc. So that is a big con to me, and also not having the included controller. Huge con. And the reason is someone would go and buy this, right? They buy this for that older AM3 platform, which I wouldn't suggest you do. You shouldn't be putting any money into that system. Or you would go and put it on, you know, recent Intel builds. I'm talking like an i7 6700K. Okay, quad cores might be on the way out, but that's still fantastic gaming chip. You might buy this cooler for it. There's a high chance your motherboard won't have an RGB connect on it. That's when you use the controller. Now, this Deepcool Baron case, it's obviously got a built-in controller on it, but my ASRock motherboard that I've got in it doesn't have any RGB. Now, if I didn't have this in it in this case, I would be using the Deepcool controller. They supply this controller with their £20 fans, so I just find it all a little bit odd. I feel like there's some tiny price cutbacks that have been made, and they don't really need to be made, and the cooler is still £80. This isn't a £50 RGB cooler, it's an £80 RGB cooler. So that's just me. I feel like the product just feels a little bit confused, but there are loads of pros. Like I said, I think this is the best looking RGB cooler for under £100. I'm talking about a cooler that comes with RGB fans and having an RGB water pump. The water pump you can put in any direction. Now you can see where I put those brackets on for screwing down to the CPU. They can actually go on the top or on the bottom. The screws are sort of symmetrical, so you can put the bracket wherever you want really. So that's great. And so obviously, you know, you've got the little that logo, you haven't got a branded logo on it, you haven't got NZXT or something, so you're worried about which way you need to put it in your system and not looking stupid. The tubing length, so it's a little tiny bit of a con, but for me it's more of a pro. I like the smaller tubing. I've always said no need to signal out NZXT, but I don't like that they have really long tubing on their coolers. But this is definitely in a bigger system. It's a top mounted radiator. You are going to want to mount this in the top. You can expand it, so the Deepcool RF120 fans, I used the extension cable that came with them, plugged it into the extension cable on this, so it works. So if you've got an RGB header, good. Performance, very good. Uprated pump, good. RGB fans, good. Lots of good things. Just feels a little bit confused, and I'd be interested on what your thoughts are on that. So please let me know in the comments below. So I'm going to end the video today. We're just going to show the Aura Sync now, and I'll be back with some new videos very soon.